I call this Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order this July 6, 2017. Could we please have roll call?
Commissioner Norberg?
Here.
Commissioner Colton?
Here.
Vice Chair Keating?
Here.
Chair Chapman?
Here.
Commissioner Rosenbaum?
Here.
Commissioner Smith?
Here.
Commissioner Bash?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Could you please to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Director Fitzer, do we have any special events or reports that you'd like to give?
Chairman, members of the commission, none at this time.
Okay, thank you. This time I'd like to address the public out here. If you'd like to address the commission on any item that is on the agenda, would you please, we have a form out here that's available to you, a public forum form that you fill out, please, and then turn it into our secretary. We'd appreciate it. And at this time, anyone that would like to speak on a non-agenda item, that this would be the time to do so. Is there anyone out there that would like to speak on a non-agenda item? Okay, seeing done, we'll move on to our first item. And that would be the consideration and action approving the June 15th, 2017 Planning and Zoning Commission minutes. Do we have any discussion? Seeing none, then I'd entertain a motion.
I move to approve the June 15th, 2017 Planning and Zoning Commission minutes.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, then please vote.
Motion passes 6 votes in favor, 1 abstention.
Thank you. Item number 2, for those people that are here regarding a sign issue, I think it might take up a little more time than the other issues, and I'd like to move that to our last item right after item number 4. This will give us plenty of time for us to discuss any any concerns that you might have. At this time, I'd like to move on to item number 3, is a consideration action on the conditional use permit to allow for a new Burger King restaurant with a drive-through facility in Greenway Marketplace located on the southeast corner of Greenway Road and Reams Road. We have a presentation tonight by Sergio Angulo. Thank you.
Good evening, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Yeah, so tonight I'll be bringing in front of you the presentation for the conditional use permit for a new Burger King with a drive-through facility. So here's the vicinity of the site. So it is located within the countryside development on the southeast corner of Reams and Greenway. Here's a close-up of the site. It's a vacant parcel of roughly 1 1.25 acre. It's lot 2B of the Greenway Marketplace. The zoning of the subject site is PAD with a commercial land use designation, and is surrounded by more PAD commercial to the north, to the northwest, and to the west you have a little bit of hard zone C2 and R15 residential. Here's a proposed site plan. So as you can see there, the Burger King building itself is just a little bit of 3,000 square feet. The site is accessed by an existing access point off of Greenway. And there's also an existing access point off of Reams Road. That driveway acts as a main driveway for the entire Greenway Marketplace development. And the applicant proposes to use what's already existing there. The drive-through itself is a 2-lane ordering drive-through that then merges into a 1-lane where the the customers will then pick up their orders and then exit to the south back to the parking area, which is at the center of the site. Here is showing you the pedestrian connectivity proposed with this site plan. So not only are they providing good connectivity within the site, they're also connecting to the existing pedestrian connections of the Greenway Marketplace development, and also they connect to the existing sidewalks along Reams Road and Greenway Road. Here's just showing you where those parking spaces are located. They are providing 2 ADA parking spaces in front of the building, and they do meet the minimum requirements by the PAD. The trash enclosure is nicely hidden at the southwest corner of the property, and it'll be enclosed with a screening wall which will match the colors and the materials of the building itself. This is a proposed landscape plan. What you see there hatched specifically along Reams and Greenway Road is already existing and will stay that way. The screening wall is also existing, and this will help the applicant screen the parking and the drive-through lane from the public along Greenway Road and Reams Road. The landscape within the site meets all the requirements of the Countryside PAD and the SUDC, and just on the west side of the building, just by where the drive-through lanes are at, the applicant's also proposing a green screen with landscaping to help screen what would be considered the back side of the building, where they will be loading up and unloading from those customers that are using the drive-through lane. One thing that I forgot to mention when I was going over the site plan was that they are proposing stop signs to warn the customers, specifically where the pedestrian crossings cross the drive-through lanes for the safety of the pedestrians. These are the proposed elevations. So there on the top, you have the south elevation, which is the front of the building. The materials and colors, they are grabbing that from the surrounding areas. And they also help to promote Burger King's, their typical design. On the bottom there, you have your west elevation, which would be facing Reams Road. And here are the other two sides. So there on top is the east elevation, and this would be screened by that green screen and landscaping that I was mentioning to you earlier. And on the bottom there, you have the north elevation, which includes a drive-through window and will be facing to the north to Greenway Road. Now, this is a conditional use permit application, so it did require a citizen outreach meeting, which the applicant held back in April. There was one member of the public who attended. They showed their support, and they also encouraged the applicant to try to hire local. Staff recommendation is of approval of this CUP. And at this point in time, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. I also want to let you guys know that the applicant is here tonight, and he's willing to come up and answer any questions that you might have specifically for him as well.
Thank you. This does call for a public hearing, and I'd like to open that public hearing at this time. And if there's anyone that we have that would like to speak on this issue, do we have any, Madam Secretary? None? If the applicant has any desire to speak, otherwise we'll move on to our discussion. Why don't we start with Commissioner Rosenbaum?
No questions at this time.
Commissioner Smith.
I have one question. In the summary, you stated that we should approve this with stipulations A and B, and then over in the suggested motions, it doesn't show any stipulations. Was that just something we left off or?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Smith, sorry. Yeah, that might have had been left off. Those stipulations, and I could read it here for you, basically state, as the SUD states, that a conditional use permit is good for 1 year. And also anything that's not in compliance with what is approved tonight, it's considered to be treated as a violation of the SUDC.
Okay, I just didn't know if we just left it off and if the motion to approve, should we include stipulations A and B?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Smith, I would include steps A and B.
Thank you. I have no other questions.
Commissioner Bash.
I don't have any questions about this particular project. I feel it's right for the area. I do, however, have a question. I frequent this particular marketplace quite a bit. And I know just south of this site is the Dairy Queen, and then there's some open storefronts there. That area of the parking lot seems to be very meandering. There isn't a whole lot of definition where the traffic lanes are at. And my concern, and I've noticed that with other parking lots, and I know when we have a commercial development like this over so many acres, you can plot it out. But I think we really need to be considerate of the motorists as they go through, because somebody needs to really take a look at the south end of that lot, because there's just a lot of meandering going on. This is much more defined with it emptying into the primary roadway coming in, so I don't have a problem with that. But coming in off of the other entrance further to the south, I think you run into a little problem because you have the Walmart pharmacy drive-through there, and you have a lot of parking, and the lanes for driving are not well defined. That's all I have.
Thank you. Vice Chair Keating.
I don't have any questions at this time. Thank you.
Commissioner Culdum.
No comments or questions at this time. Thank you.
Commissioner Norberg.
I don't have any concerns or anything about the Burger King going in there. I do want to know how many employees each Burger King hires.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Norberg, I think it would be best for the applicant to answer that question.
Could you please state your name for the record, please?
Good evening. Yes, Brad Flahiff.
Thank you.
Is that it? Typically, it depends on volume, but typically 25 to 30 employees per restaurant.
And with the ones that you have here, are a lot of those hiring the teenagers, those that are in high school, those that are recently graduated? So that, I mean, obviously, if you were to do that, you would definitely be hiring local.
Yeah, it would be real unusual for us not to hire local, as you can imagine. It's very much neighborhood typically. The one exception might be managers, and even them by local, it may be not in Surprise, but coming from nearby areas. So, and yes, we would be typically hiring. I'd say the mix is, yeah, teenager, young adult, certainly some seniors, some stay-at-home moms looking for part-time. So probably pretty typical.
Okay, great.
Fast food.
Thank you. That was my only comment or question.
Okay.
Thank you. This is a public hearing, and is there anyone else who would like to speak on this matter? If not, then I'll close our public hearing. And are there any other questions from the commission? Seeing none, then I would entertain a motion, and I think we need to include the stipulation.
I move to approve the conditional use permit to allow for a new Burger King restaurant with a drive-through facility in the Greenway Marketplace located on the southeast corner of Greenway Road and Reams Road with stipulations A and B.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further questions? Seeing none, would we please vote?
Motion passes 7 votes in favor.
Thank you. Our next item is the consideration and action regarding the conditional use permit for an automotive service station in the Surprise Farms PAD at the southwest corner of Bell Road and Loop 303 Freeway. And we have a presenter here, planner Mr. Kufis.
Good evening, Chairman, Commissioners. The case before you is FS 17-121, and this is for the corner store at Surprise Farms Gateway. It's a request for a conditional use permit. Joining us tonight is Patrick Musser from PM Design Group. If there's any questions that I can't answer, he's available here to answer. The excuse me. The property is located over in the Winco Center at roughly Bell and Loop 303. On approximately 2.17 acres. Zooming in a little bit tighter, it is within the Surprise Farms PAD. The red line is the approximate boundary of the property that's before you today. You notice that it doesn't quite match up with the parcel boundaries on the map, and I'll get to that in a minute. This is the larger Winco site plan. As it's currently approved. The area that we're talking about is right in here. Dialing it a little bit tighter. We have the main building, the storefront building. This is the corner store, convenience store type building. Faces to the north. The fuel island right along through here. Access coming through 2 driveway points right in through here, and then out on both ends along the south end. Pedestrian connectivity coming off the street and into the front of the store. Now, I wanted to mention about this layout. We've been struggling with, how we orient some of these buildings and so forth. And initially, when we were talking with the applicant, we were trying to maybe get them to flop the design so that the building was up against Bell Road, maybe have a little different presentation to the street, and then that would put the fuel canopy back in here, but. It doesn't really work well in a gas station sort of environment. It doesn't work well for the applicant. And then part of our review team is our own police department, and there's a design concept, design philosophy called crime prevention through environmental design, CPTED. And this is the idea that we want to try to develop or design our communities that minimize the opportunity for crimes and so forth. And as was pointed out, when you have people pumping gas, they're a little bit of a vulnerable situation. They're not paying attention to what's going on. They're pumping gas and so forth. This arrangement works well for PD because they can drive down Bell Road and see what's going on. They can see the building. They can see the gas pumps. And so we're very comfortable with how the site has been arranged. We think it's the best solution. Another slide about some of the details and so forth, in particular, the parking screen wall. The architecture, it doesn't match the Winco Center, but it's designed to tie in with it as some of the other buildings through there that you've seen recently. And then it'll probably be nicely landscaped around the perimeter. And then a rendering of how it would look, the landscaping and so forth. The buildings, as you see, we asked them to bring in some of the stonework from the Winco, so they're bringing in the stonework. This green accent panel is really about their branding, and they actually have a CST green. That's about their corporate branding, and so that's why they wanted to keep that on their. Even though you won't find that anywhere else in the Winco Center, this is about the corner store. And similarly, the fuel island. The Valero teal, and it is also about corporate branding, and that's what their sign is and the gas pumps and so forth, and that teal color. A couple of renderings that show what the property would look like. Looking to the east, another rendering looking to the west. I think it blends in nicely with the surrounding area. The sign package. These are all the different signs that are going on the property, including a sign panel out here on the Winco pylon sign. Going through it without getting into too much detail on it, you can see what's happening with the signage here. They did ask to be able to put an extra sign over on this other end, and it's not really addressed in the sign package. The comprehensive sign program for the Winco. And it would arguably exceed probably what is allowed under the SUDC, but it is consistent with what we would like to do with our sign code. which we'll be talking about here directly. So we don't have a lot of, we think it's appropriate to have this extra signage over here. We don't think it's overbearing and so forth. We're comfortable with that. And likewise, on the ends, the Valeros on the west elevation, on the opposite end, they'll put this green canopy, not the whole thing, but just this logo on the other end. And so just look at the reverse image of that and then picture that green CS on the end of the canopy. And we're comfortable with that. There's the monument sign going out in the front. That actually the comprehensive sign program is silent on this type of sign, but it does talk about a pad monument sign, and it is consistent with the dimensions that are spelled out in the comprehensive sign program. So we're comfortable with that as well. And then, as I say, they'll be putting a panel in the Winco. The stipulations that you have before you, they're in the staff report stipulations A through E. Then we have an extra stipulation that we'd like to add, a new stipulation F regarding the timing of this CUP approval relative to the recordation of a lot line adjustment. So going back to my on the beginning of the presentation where the red line didn't quite line up, it's because they're moving some lot lines around, and everybody was intending that would all be done and recorded and so forth. There's a little bit of a delay getting that recorded. So we want to just make sure that the lot line, that the plating document that will serve to adjust those lot lines gets recorded, and that's what that new stipulation is for. So our recommendation would be for approval subject to stipulations basically A through F, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Before we get started, this also calls for a public hearing. I'd like to open that public hearing at this time. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak in this matter? Seeing none, then let's move on with, why don't we start with Vice Chair Keating? Would you have any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Colton.
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Norberg.
I do actually have a couple of questions regarding those green panels that you guys have that says it's going to be determined on what will be there. What is normally on those green panels?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, I would probably want to defer to Patrick, but these are kind of I believe these are like poster sort of things, and it was just a way of, so.
Would you be so kind to state your name for
It's
the record?
Pat Musser with PM Design Group. Basically they're, I guess, more of an advertisement, changeable panel, advertising some of the goods for the convenience store on the side of the building there. So they'll be changeable, but basically it's 2x3, 6 square foot panels.
Are they neon? Are they like
no,
they
they're not
with...
illuminated.
Okay.
Yeah, non-illuminated.
Okay. And then I'm not from here, so I'm not familiar with the Valero sign. When I look at this Winco sign that has the freeway sign that we have there, is that your standard sign that you have there, or is there, because that, to me, if I'm driving by and I'm not from here and not familiar with Valero, I might not realize that that's actually a gas station. It seems like the corner store is what's being advertised instead of the gas station.
Well, yeah, that is the standard sign layout, advertising both the corner store, convenience store, and also the Valero. Actually, they're two separate companies. CST Corner Store emphasis is more the convenience store building, where they also have a kitchen in there too. And then they contract with Valero for the gas sales. They used to be part of Valero one time, but broke apart probably about 10 years ago.
Okay.
So yeah, they do, that is the standard sign, and do advertise both.
Okay. Honestly, I prefer the Valero to be a little bit bigger. I think it's just for people who are driving through, and maybe not. Again, I'm not familiar. I didn't grow up around Valeros, so. But thank you. I appreciate the comment there. I do like the sign that you have for the. What do you call that one? The one that has the unleaded and the diesel, and it has the. I think that is going to be really nice. So I don't think I had any other questions. If I do find them in my notes, because I didn't realize I was going to be so quick, I will let you know. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Bash,
No questions.
Commissioner Smith.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I didn't see on your map, and it's not there, the exit on the east side where they're exiting to go out onto Bell Road. How far is that exit from where the traffic lane where you need to get over to exit off the 303? Because cars are starting to move over from the various lanes to get into the lane where you back up to get onto the 303 in the mornings. How far is that from the actual place where you need to get over one lane?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, the exact distance you're talking from here
to where you
out
have
here.
to get into the turn lane for the 303.
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I do know that this will have a right turn pocket set up right here.
Okay, so that'll be a separate, it'll
Yeah.
be another lane inside.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
My question is because cars are getting over from,
Mhm.
people don't realize the 303 is there and they're getting over 3 lanes all at once. Okay, driving sideways. The other question I have is, this is almost directly across from the current Valero and convenience store. Are they closing that one?
Yes, I can answer that. CST's plan is to keep the other store open. At the time they fill, there'd be enough business volume at this location to keep both stores going. So there's no plans to close the other store.
Okay, because obviously Albertson's closed
Right.
and we don't need another empty property over there. So I'm having
Right,
that
yes.
concern. Okay, thank you. I have no other questions.
Commissioner Rosenbaum.
No questions.
Yeah, I have just one question about the alignment on the south side of this building. Do you have,
You talking right through here, the drive?
yes.
Yes, okay.
The question is, does this alignment, there will be a roadway there that connects to the other properties, the other, back of the other property, so it'll be a straight?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, it won't be a public dedicated right of way, but it will be an internal driveway that will circulate throughout the larger Winco Center.
But it will be it's not going to be curved and other things. It'll be pretty much straight.
Yes, and so if you see here, the plan is, and this grayed out area may change, of course, and you'll see those changes if that does happen. But yeah, the idea.
I'm looking at the streets to the west of that alignment.
Right here?
To the west, no, going from east to west or west to east. That roadway right there is going to go to there and then stop. Is that what we're saying?
It should come all the way through and right on past and into this area.
So that
here.
will be a roadway through that.
Yeah. Just not publicly
Portion.
dedicated. It'd be part of the interior drive
That's
system.
the only question I have then. This is a public hearing. Is there any other comments from the public at this time? If not, then I'll close the public hearing. And any further discussion from our commissioners? Seeing none, then I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the request conditional use permit subject to stipulation A through F as recommended by staff.
A second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Would you please vote?
Motion passes 7 votes in favor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, at this time, we'd like to move back to our item number 2. And item number 2 deals with our agenda item, the discussion regarding the proposed text amendment to Chapter 113, Signs of Surprise Municipal Code. And we have a presentation by Mr. Kufis.
All right, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I took a seat. Hopefully, won't be here that long. I have a hunch we'll be here a little while.
Let's take his water away from him too.
So yes, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, we're working on our sign code, and tonight's subject matter is wall signs and freestanding signs. just how, we've had the background and so forth. But you'll recall back in April 20th, you'd asked us to kind of not hit you with a fire hose and, like drinking from a fire hose. And so we broke it out into smaller pieces that we could get into some of the nuts and bolts of each one of these little segments in a little bit more detail. So in a couple of weeks, you'll have another chance. And at that point in time, the plan is to talk about billboards, freeway signs, electronic messaging. Then on August 3rd, we'll be talking about temporary signs, and that'll be an interesting discussion. But I want to be able to talk about these other things first before we get into the temporary signs. And then about a month later, in early September, we'll come back and it'll be an open discussion. Be able to pick up any loose ends, things that changes that we will have made to the sign code, but maybe we didn't discuss, but we certainly want to be, open and transparent about all that process and so forth, and any of the summary revisions that we might have. And then following that, depending on what kind of direction that we get from you, we're targeting P&Z hearing, a public hearing on October 5th, excuse me. And then that would lead to a city council work session on November 7th. Whatever feedback we get from city council would then potentially necessitate some more revisions, and then a final public hearing on December 5th. So it's kind of a long way of getting through it, but it's a way of making sure that we've got everybody has a good opportunity to weigh in on this code, because it is very, very important. So tonight, excuse me, sorry. The things we want to talk about, is methods of measurement, wall signs and freestanding signs, and getting into some of the nitty gritty here, but moving right along. When we're talking about the methods of measurement, the way we wrote the definition, the smallest rectangle or areas of a two-dimensional sign that will enclose all of the sign copy, or the three-dimensional sign, 50% of the volume of the smallest cuboid that can include the sign. And we included some diagrams that would explain that. And inadvertently, we had kind of created a diagram that didn't quite agree with that definition. Now, to kind of go through this a little bit, we just had kind of a hypothetical situation. We got a Wendy's sign that I plucked, or Wendy's restaurant that I plucked off the internet, and just to give you a visual. And if we have a scenario that maybe where the building would allow 6 square feet of signage, and so this is somewhat to scale here, and I think it's on the plan it's like 6 inches, but it's somewhat to scale. Try to make it to scale. And the single rectangle method would box that entire thing in, and that would be the amount of sign area that you would get. Now, with us tonight, I meant to mention, we have James Carpentier. James Carpentier is with the International Sign Association. He's been extremely helpful with us going through this process. And as he has pointed out, this type of methodology has a tendency to push everything into the smallest rectangle. I mean, you get square signs. And so in order to have a little bit more freedom, a little more creativity, they're recommending that we go with a multiple geometry methodology, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the other alternative is a multiple rectangle, and there are other jurisdictions. Peoria is using this type of thing here, where you actually draw a series of boxes around each of the different elements. And in this scenario, if you measure the area inside the single rectangle and you compare that to the area inside these multiple rectangles, it's the same area. And what you get is a larger sign and a more creative sign. So we want to be able to encourage that sort of creativity, not hem people in by telling everybody they got to fit into this box. So, so again, same, slightly different methodology, but you wind up with a slightly bigger sign, and of course more visibility. Now, the multiple geometry method, this comes from a framework on sign regulation by 2009. This is the methodology of multiple geometry, and I'm a little bit afraid of the multiple geometry because it's, when you're working in a CAD drawing, you can draw a circle around something. It'll tell you to the, 2 decimal points how big it is. But when we're doing plan review, we don't have that capacity. We're there with a scale, and we're trying to figure that out. And so it's a lot easier to measure a square with a scale than it is to try to measure a bunch of curlicues and so forth. So we're comfortable. We like the idea of what this is getting to, but I think we're comfortable with the idea of just going with the multiple rectangle methodology. And this, and both have the reason is to kind of get rid of some of that negative space between the edge of the box and the actual lettering. And when you compare the 3 together, so the single geometry versus, that's about 6 square feet, same size sign in this case, but or same size rectangle, but here we're talking 4 square feet versus 4 square feet versus 6 square feet. So I don't know if I confused you more than helped, but we, and then of course, looking at the jurisdictional comparison, you'd ask that we go out and look at some of the other jurisdictions and see what they were doing as well. And you can see it's kind of, some are doing the multiple rectangle, others doing multiple geometry. It's kind of, hit or miss. But as I say, we're comfortable with the multiple rectangle, but we're open to your opinions and thoughts. And if you have any, the whole idea is to be able to, allow for a larger, more creative sign, wall sign. So we'll pause and let you, however you want to proceed with this one.
We'll let you start and ask if anybody has any questions about what they've heard so far. See none, then
Can I actually ask you?
well,
Sorry.
sure can.
You don't like either geometry or rectangle? Is that what I'm hearing? You out of those two, which one do you prefer?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, the one that we're leaning towards is the multiple rectangle.
Rectangle. Thank you.
Now, does that mean that you will not be using just the rectangle, single rectangle, or does it mean you have an option to do either one?
Well, it's a fair question. Thank you. There is another scenario, and that is you have a sign that is framed by a box, and that box is part of the sign, or there's a wall, and there's a, the sign, there's some sort of a background. And then we would use the single rectangle, just drawing a box around that background. So if you could picture one of these coffers in the back here, and there was a sign in there, that might be the whole, we'd use a single rectangle in that sort of a scenario. But when you have a sign that's just mounted on the wall, we want to be able to use the multiple rectangle methodology.
So you are saying that you can use both?
Depending on the circumstance, yes.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain what the calculation is for multiple geometry method? I mean, is that something that our staff's pretty sharp that they can figure that out if that were the option that we went with?
Maybe we could save that question for later, give you time to think about while you're trying to tell us about something else.
I was just reading this and trying to figure out a way to paraphrase that.
Yeah, I think just from looking at your thing that it could be a calculation nightmare for you. So I don't know. I think unless you have the equipment or technology to do that, it might be difficult for you.
That is my view. I don't want to, if James has got some other thoughts on this, I'm certainly, like I say, he's been extremely, valuable through all this method. So if he's got some thoughts on this,
okay.
If you're okay with
Thank
that.
you. Would you please state your name for the record for us?
Thanks, Bob. James Carpentier here on behalf of Arizona Sign Association and International Sign Association. And what I would suggest is it can get very complex, but if you just use the standard geometric shapes, which I think there's 7 or 8, I'm not sure exactly, but there's only a few standard shapes and require that the calculation methods go on the plan, then you could kind of spot check those. And it's very easy to calculate the standard shapes. I think you start getting into the wild shapes and it does get a little more complex. So that, and it's a good compromise because it's not giving you're allowing the creativity that Bob talked about, but it's a little easier to administer for staff and also for the applicants. But the biggest bonus of doing that is you don't penalize a shape that's really irregular. And sometimes they can get so small that it gets dumbed down and it gets simplified to be able to work. Because your code, it's reasonable. It's not like it's unreasonable, but you could have deductions of 50, 60% depending upon how irregular it is. So then it makes the designers have to sometimes work within the box, if that's the only thing that you have. So that's really the main reason for it, which you referred to, the creativity, really.
So I think maybe the next question I'd have is that we want to use all three. Would that be correct? All three methods? Potentially?
We can think our way through that.
Is the recommendation to have all three? Or is the recommendation to have the commission look at their favorite ones?
Mr. Chairman, our thought was to go with, or to clarify the language that we would be looking at the multiple rectangle methodology for signs that are just mounted to the wall, and a single rectangle methodology when that sign is framed inside of a box. And I wish I had a better example. I apologize for that. But I wonder if there is one in here.
If I could ask, does excluding one of them make it more difficult for a business owner? It seems to me that the rectangle and the geometry ends up being the same square foot. It's just about whether or not which one is easier for you guys to use.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I think if looking at this particular Wendy's right here, the Wendy's graphic on the right is kind of their old school design. This is something that's a little bit more contemporary, and you can see it's a much more curvilinear. And I think that if we're talking about using a multiple geometry methodology, I think that would be hard to quantify. Certainly this Wendy inside the circle, that's easy. That's an easy calculation. But trying to get around all of this might be a little bit more difficult. But being able to draw boxes around it would probably be a little bit easier. So
you're saying the multiple rectangle method would be the preferred for this type of signage then, and allow the creativity that people need.
That's my leaning, but
I think if you get into it and you said you can't use the CAD program, you're going to tie up a lot of staff trying to figure geometrical equations for odd shapes. And I think the creativity of just using the two methods that you suggested gives them enough leeway to be creative, yet still not burden the staff. It's my opinion.
I agree with that. It's not a huge difference.
That's correct.
It's small. Yeah,
it's very small, and it really just the unique shapes.
Okay. Then we'll work on polishing that language up and make sure that the definition and all that they all agree, and so there's no more confusion on that.
Okay. If there's no other questions, then why don't we move on to the wall signs?
All righty. So the next topic has to do with the wall sign, the area ratio. The way we wrote this, the draft code is 1 1/2 square foot per linear foot of elevation. And we set it up where it could be allowed on any elevation of the primary use building, regardless of its orientation to the street. And the reason we did that is the current code is a little bit confusing. It wants 1 square foot per linear foot of elevation on the primary elevation and allow 1/2 a square foot on secondary elevations. And depending on how it's oriented to the street, again, it adds to the confusion, and this simplifies everything. With the other caveat that it not exceed 80% of the width of the building, of the elevation. And similarly, if it was a multi-tenant building, same sort of thing. And so this sort of a scenario is not unusual. The question is, how much sign? How big do you want the signs? So as a comparison, These two buildings are actually in the same parking lot up on Bell Road. They're actually part of the same development, but one was subject to a comprehensive sign program where the other one was not. And so the one on the right had the CSP that allowed them to go with a larger sign, where the one on the left didn't. And so if we look more closely at the area on the left, and in particular the barber sign, and I did my best given the tools that we have. So imagine that this sign is just slightly larger, and how it just makes that sign just a little bit more visible from the street. And so I think the question, and then here's again the jurisdictional comparison, how others are doing their signs and so forth. There was some discussion somewhere along the lines about potentially having a minimum size, where somebody that has a skinny storefront isn't stuck with a sign that's the size of a sheet of paper. So we could look at that as well. But the question really is, are you comfortable with the idea of writing language that would allow for more building signage? And the other part of this, just to be clear, is, as I said, it would be on any building elevation, regardless of its orientation to the street, with the caveat that if that sign is within a certain distance, and I forget off the top of my head, if it's within a certain distance of a residential area, a single-family residential area, that sign has to be turned off between 10 and 6, and I forget the exact time. So we don't want the signs glaring in the backyards of people's homes. That would be unpleasant.
Not to interrupt, but with this 1.5 square feet per 1 linear feet, they can only put signs on one side of the building, not 4 sides of the building. Is this correct?
Mr. Chairman, the way it's written, they could do any elevation.
So they could put 1.5, they could put a sign on the front, a sign on the side, a sign on the back, and a sign on, so they could look like a revolving billboard. Is that the current code? Can they do that now?
No, Mr. Chairman, right now the current code, and some of the CSPs might be a little bit different, but the current code says on your primary elevation, you get 1 square foot of sign, and then on your secondary, you get a 1/2 square foot.
Okay, so the comparison cities, because I've driven through some other cities and I haven't seen signs all the way around the buildings. Is that?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Smith, I think what we had in mind is if you look right up to the north here, Bell Road, there's some buildings that not only do they face Bell Road, but they also face the parking lot. And so do you want to penalize them because they can only choose between one wall? They're only allowed to have a sign on one wall. That's what we were thinking about.
And I understand. I mean, we have a lot of buildings along Bell Road that back up, which I don't agree with that, but that's beside the point. And they are identifying them that this is a donut place, this is a restaurant, et cetera, which makes lots of sense. And then when you come around and you're facing the buildings from the inside, they need to identify them. But I just have concerns if you're a single building setting out on a corner and all of a sudden you have signs all the way around, that I don't know if that doesn't distract from the look of the city. So that's my concern. I don't know if anybody else shares that concern. I can understand the two, where they're signing a building that backs up to the thoroughfare and then signing the front of the building from the parking lot. But I just don't know if we need to have signs all the way around the building, especially if they're lit, even if they turn off at night. So that's just my opinion.
Mr. Kufis, I am curious. In our city, how many signs are we talking about that would be within 100 feet of residential, visible from a residential area, that would require being turned off at night? I know it's really an abstract question, but are we talking a really small number specific to these wall signs?
Mr.
Go
Chairman,
off between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m.?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I haven't done an analysis on that. I don't know off the top of my head, but I can think of a few circumstances where that might happen. If you have a shopping center next to a residential area, those are the kinds of things that we'd want to be careful of.
Mm-hmm.
But what we could do, Chairman, is we could go back and try to put together some language that addresses these concerns. that we don't, that we can maybe say that the sign can be oriented to the street and the parking lot, but not the alley, or that sort of thing. And that might help to address some of these concerns. If you want, we can certainly explore that kind of language. That's why we're here. So.
I don't know if anybody else has that concern.
Yeah, I'm thinking that I seem appropriate is like you're driving along Bill and you're looking at the backside of a building. Would that also allow them to have a sign on the, it'd be the south side or the entrance side of the building, which seems appropriate. But yet, is there a limit? I mean, is it all four sides? Is it two sides? Is it, and I think the direction of the bill or the actual building and its position with respect to roads and so on, I think might play a part in that. And so maybe we could take a look at it
Okay.
a little bit.
All right.
And I think just in my question, in District 6, I think of the Pizza Hut Express right on the corner of Cactus and Bullard. And I'm in my brain trying to imagine 100 feet from the nearest residential. I'm guessing from where their existing sign would be for Pizza Hut would be well beyond 100 feet to the residential wall in the neighborhood right there. And so I just wondered how often that would occur. And that was really motivating my question. So thank you.
I noticed in wall signs and monument signs, I noticed there was some valuable information in the comment section from people that shrubs and trees canopies play a good part too. I noticed there's small trees, signs up, looks great, and then all of a sudden, next you don't know that it's even there because of the canopy and stuff, and trimming shrubs and things. I think those comments in there are valuable to really take a look at, is to make for sure that if we're planting trees, that we do allow that visibility. I think when we look at our landscaping plan that we could kind of couple that with maybe some of the signage so that monument signs, wall signs will have visibility, for the driver. So.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it's a challenge. We're kind of to some extent working at cross purposes, trying to create shade and walkable areas and still provide visibility to the signs. So yes, and I think probably what we can do is we're working through our planning and engineering design standards, our PEDs. We can look at those landscape standards and set things up that will address those issues.
Yeah, I think somebody that has a building and a sign for their business and they have an approved landscaping plan that may interfere with their signage after a period of some years maybe, and I think that should be a part of the considerations.
I do have one more comment on the 1.5 square foot. I think your example of where you used the barber and the new sign, I think that's a great example because that would make it much more visible from either the parking lot or that's the Albertsons parking lot. And if they would have used that type of signing, that whole shopping center would have been much better looking and much more visible for our customers and been better for the businesses. I just have a concern about people making signs all the way around the building. And yeah, you see that down on used tires and some of that in some of the communities. So I just don't want to see that here.
Okay, we'll work on some language. Good, okay.
Thank you. I guess we can move on.
All right. Another provision that we wrote into this is an increase in the wall sign area based on the distance of the road. And this, we had a comment a while back relating to the the new Ottawa University and the proximity of that sign and the lack of visibility of that sign on the south elevation. You can't see it from Greenway. Now, it's a little bit of a different scenario because there's streets in between and they're not trying to get signage off of Bell Road. But it got us to thinking, excuse me, about the idea that if you do have a big building that's set off from the road, maybe there's an opportunity to increase the amount of sign relative to this, to how far away it is from the street, from the street. And so we set it up here in using the Sam's Club as an example. As Sam's Club moves further away from Bell Road, that sign could potentially get bigger, and by up to 2.25 square feet per linear foot of building elevation. So this would be, you wouldn't be able to use it in every scenario. It would not solve the issue with the Ottawa sign because it serves a different street, but it might help in this sort of a circumstance here. So not a whole lot of other jurisdictions, although Buckeye said that you could increase it if it's you can go double inside if you're 300 feet away from the public right of way. Again, it's just your thoughts on that provision.
Is this on major thoroughfares only, or would it be on access?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, the intent was for it to be on major thoroughfares. We probably would need to. I feel like I'm staring. The intent would be to for that, I think, and probably we need to maybe put some clarifying language in there to just dial that in a little bit. I would hate to think that a building that was a quarter mile off of the road would have a giant sign on it.
Billboard.
What's that?
A billboard.
Yeah.
If it's far enough off the road.
Yeah. So I think maybe there's an opportunity to tighten up the language a little bit. But if you like the idea, we'll work that way. If you don't like the idea, we'll just get rid of it.
Well,
I think it's a good idea.
I think it is too, but you've already increased it, haven't you, from 1 foot to 1.5?
Yes.
Per lineal feet. So you're then going to say it can go up even more than the 1.5. So have we looked at any of these signs and went out and looked at, say, a Sam's or something and say, how big could their sign be if we propose this? And is it going to be a sign that's 6 foot by 100 foot? Is it going to be, so I think staff could go out and look at a couple of those and say the Albertsons building is empty and they have a face there. How big of a sign could a new tenant in that building put up? And if it's going to be way too big, then maybe, because we've already said you can go from 1 to 1.5. So we've already made it 50% bigger as far as the allowable sign. And now we're saying, okay, you can go 2.5 times that. So are we talking about how big a sign? I'd like to see something, you go out and measure one. I would say Albertsons is probably what, 600 feet or so off of Bell Road, the closed Albertsons on Bell, that shopping center where you had the barbershop picture.
Right. Mm-hmm.
How big a sign could they put on that building?
We can look at that.
And if we look, and that guy would give you some reference point as to, we've already said from 1 to 1.5. So we've already said a 50% increase. Now we're saying they can go 2.5 times the 50% increase. How big a sign is that going to be? I can't in my head come up with how big it's going to be. I just can't.
There could be a relationship in terms of, I don't want to, we need an ophthalmologist here maybe, is not an inverse relationship between the size of the sign that they would see 300 feet off the road versus 1,000 feet. Would it be proportionally the same visibility to the eye, if you will, or visibility? Mm-hmm. And I think if you take the actual distance measurement and could apply those feet in terms of whether it's 1.5 or 1.75 or 2.0, I think the proportional relationship to the eye 1,000 feet away would be similar to another store with a much smaller sign in the same position proportionately. And I don't want to get too technical, but I think if we could look at it in maybe those terms, then I think it would help answer some of Commissioner Smith's questions about how big is big, you know.
Right. Okay, then, Mr. Chairman, then we can work on that. We can put something together. It probably wouldn't land. It'll probably be in the last of the 4 meetings before we would be able to bring that around to be able to keep on track with the other things. But we can certainly do that. We can work on some of the tightening up that language, put together some graphics that show how, you know, to your point, what's the proportional relationship, and like the barbershop sign, how that would look, and then on the 4th of these meetings, we'll come back and present that again to you as part of that final presentation.
And you know, if you can add a picture to this existing slide that would show us what that looks like, I think that answers Commissioner Smith's question.
Just how big would the sign look on Albertson's, the blank
that's
building?
simple.
Yep, good point. Thank you.
All right, if nothing, I guess we can move on to.
We also included a provision that basically a tall building could have an additional sign, and really this was, you know, I was thinking frankly about my own travels, and you know, when I fly into a new city, and you know, GPS gets me in the neighborhood, but I'm still looking for that sign, and so this could be an opportunity, you know, for a little bit larger sign, an extra sign, and so forth. Now, we tied this to buildings in excess of 5 stories. You could shrink that down to 3 stories, so it would be or 4 stories, so it would be more applicable to some of the hotels that are in town. But this is the idea here. Not a lot of information on that on the other jurisdictions. Peoria has a provision regarding it has to be located on the upper 25% of the wall, and Glendale had a different provision. If erected above 56 feet, must be in the upper 10% of the wall, not exceed 80% of the width of the wall. Same idea. Again, if you like the idea, maybe we need to polish the language or whatever. Or we can shrink it down to a shorter building, or raise it up to a taller building, or however you want to go with it. It's up to you.
To have that option, I think, would be a great addition for our city.
Okay.
I also think that when you get the taller buildings, sometimes there's multi-tenants, and the developer, the business wants to put, like, this is the Chrysler building or whatever it is. So they're selling a particular thing. I think that's good. I think 5 stories is sufficient. I mean, especially if we're looking at the future in the downtown.
Okay, that was fairly easy.
Mr. Kupis, is there any relationship, like the Del Webb Hospital has a rather large sign on it? And is medical, or are there any professions that would be excluded from the requirement for the sign based on like emergency use or anything like that?
I don't know. I hadn't thought about that.
You know, I'm thinking, you know, people that aren't familiar with the area or something like that, that want to get to a hospital or an emergency room, you know, the signage tends to be larger on the canopies for emergency rooms. And it's just a question I wanted to throw out on some of those essential services in a community, if they can exceed the normal sign standard just for being able to be located readily by the consumer.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, we'll look at that. I don't know if we'll run into any kind of content issues like that if in light of Reed, but we can certainly take a look at how we might be able to make that work. Okay. All right. So we added another piece into this, a projecting sign, a blade sign, and this we felt there was a real opportunity to put some character into some of the signage. There's no provision for it right now, but this type of signage can really add a lot of visual interest to the area. So we wanted to put this into our sign code. Now, the way we have it drawn, the top of the sign can extend above the parapet of the building, which is inconsistent with this sign that was taken in Texas. But you get the idea of how that blade sign might work and how it might operate. We did set up some minimum clearance requirements so people aren't knocking their heads, and if it happens to be over a parking lot, the fire truck's not knocking their light bar off when they're going into a whatever. But and there's other jurisdictions that do make some provisions for this type of signage. And really, it's just just a quick question: Are you comfortable with that? Like I say, we think that there's a real opportunity to create some character. So,
looks good.
Great idea.
Moving on to window signs. The current sign code, you have to go to two different places in the sign code to find out how much window signage you're allowed, because it makes a distinction between permanent window signs and not permanent window signs. And we just for simplicity, we said, let's just tie it all together. Let's just lump it together. It doesn't matter if it's a permanent sign, a temporary sign, window sign. You get 40%. And in deference to a comment that we got, it would exclude etched or stained glass. We're not trying to ding somebody because they have a pretty window. But it doesn't contribute towards the aggregate sign area for the wall sign, so it's completely different calculation. Now, there were also some commentary that do we need to be involved in regulating window signs? You look at the one on the bottom. This is over in Glendale. The entire window is wrapped in a sign. Some would argue that it makes it impossible to see inside the building, but on the other hand, if you put a sunscreen on that building, you still couldn't see inside the building. And again, the other jurisdictions, a lot of them, some of them, Phoenix, can get very complicated with how they're doing it. We just wanted to simplify it. We recognize that type of signage, especially like in a fast food restaurant, that's poster on the window. I rely on it. I want to know when I can get my 2 tacos for $1, and so the question is, are we comfortable with the 40%? Do you want to just get rid of it altogether and not regulate it, or how would you like to proceed?
Well, it's interesting. When I researched this item, I thought of a certain restaurant, and for obvious reasons, I won't say which restaurant it is in our city, that currently has in excess of 40% signage in windows. And for me, there's a lunch special, there's a dinner special, there's a variety of other options that are afforded there. And so I first asked myself, how many of our current city signs on windows are already, out of compliance with code? And so for me, I was wondering, do we want to have 40% as that number, given we have some businesses here that are beyond that percentage already? So I'm weighing in my own mind just the whole idea of 40% or more. So I don't know. I don't know the answer. Any other thoughts?
Many of the fast food restaurants use that for their weekly specials, their monthly specials, and a number of them, to your point, have one in every window, and it is more than 40%. But we also need to be able to not have people like the one example you showed where they're really taking their windows and making it a wall sign. I mean, so there's got to be something there. I mean, otherwise you can get by with violating the wall sign by putting your big wall sign up and then wrapping the windows in a sign. And people do that. I don't know if that's wrong or right. I just know that you'll have people that'll push it to one extreme or the other. I don't know what the right answer is, but To Eric's point, there is people who right now that have a sign in every window, and I understand their business. I mean, they have a lot of specials, and they have breakfast, and they have lunch, and etc. But I don't know what the answer is. I don't know whether we keep it. Uh, do we modify it? I don't know how you make it fair. Anybody else got any
Boy,
comments? I don't know how you do it.
Same question.
You think, I know we've all probably seen abuses, if you will, not abuses, but excessive amounts. And I think, gee, that looks pretty cluttered. It doesn't look
Run
very
that
appealing,
business.
aesthetically pleasing to the neighborhood or maybe the commercial area. And yet, at the other end, there may be somebody that's has their 40%, but is it 40% for every single window? And now I want to make sure I get a place that has windows across the whole front so I can get my second big sign. I don't know. I think it's a difficult question. I think we need to think about it a little more. But my gut is that we should probably have something to, maybe it's the 40%. I don't know. I think we should have some kind of rule that might be fair to all people. And I know that we have different businesses with different types of need to communicate, and we want to be fair to all of them. But I think at the same time, we need to see what would work for all of them. So maybe we could bring that back later too.
And if there's a way, like Commissioner or Chair Chapman's mentioning, if there's a way so we can identify what's not acceptable as the stipulation or the exception, it might make coming up with that number a little easier for all of us.
One thing that I think we need to consider here, my son's a graphic designer, and he worked at both the print shop level for major corporations, one of which was Victoria's Secrets. Corporate, for a lot of these fast food chains, produce those banners. And I think if you're going to do anything, I think you need to go out to the major corporation vendors that we have in our community and find out what they get from corporate. Because if you're going to change something that is going to make Surprise, Arizona 100% different than the entire nation, then you're actually adding cost to that corporate. And that's not to say good or bad, but I think it's something that should actually be looked into. You know, can they readily be changed if you would do this, so that it doesn't become a nightmare for the manager of that particular shop with his corporate office?
Okay.
And I think we're dealing with two different types of signs also. Some are promotional and they're changed, and some are permanent that they put up and they, it's hours or whatever it is. So, I mean, yeah, maybe we could even look at saying, permanent type signs occupy no more than 40%, and promotional signs, or, I don't know how you approach that, because as far as the retail establishments, they're sent a package, a sign package, and they open it up. And if they got 6 windows, you put 6 signs up. If you've got 4 windows, you put up 4. You're going to get a package. They're not going to tailor the package to your specific location. Corporate sends out a packet, and here's your sign recommendations, and you make it as well as you can based on your particular facility. So I don't know how do you get around it. And it looks like there's different needs from different businesses. And if you had a big run of like a glass front, which we have some stores like some of the mattress firms and some where you have a complete glass front, do you want them to have the whole windows filled with that? And maybe they wouldn't do it. Maybe they want people to look inside. And if you're in a car and you're driving through, they want you to look at the signs to tell you what's on sale and what they're offering for that month. So I don't know, maybe nothing, and maybe good business sense would make the people who have a complete glass front, they wouldn't have put it in if they didn't want people to look in their store. And I guess you could get away with making it one big sign, but I don't know if that'd be the right business decision for them or not. So it's something we need to think about a little bit. I'm not sure which way I would lean. I don't know if you can, I don't think you can really make people follow a 40%. I mean, who's going to, the compliance would be not very well. And if you're not going to have compliance, then you shouldn't have a regulation.
Right.
Because some people, if we're not going to go out and say, if that's the regulation, we ought to hold them to it. And if not, then we shouldn't have the regulation and let the business person decide what's best for them. I don't know. That's just my thoughts.
I think you have enough information maybe to ask some questions, maybe corporate type questions and others. Maybe we can bring it back.
Yeah, yes, I think we can work on that, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank
All right, moving into walls, monument sign versus pole sign. It's a minor thing, although the intent is really about aesthetics, and what we didn't want is a bunch of boxes on a bunch of sticks. And you can go into other jurisdictions, and that's what you get. What we wanted to do was to have it be a little less pole-like. And so we wrote into the definition the difference between a monument sign and a freestand, or a monument sign and a pole sign, really has to do with the width of the support underneath the sign. And it's not uncommon for this to be 50% of the width, but it seems that it still reads like a box on a stick. So we upped it to 75%. And so a pole sign is less than 75%, and a monument is greater than 75% or more. And just to take out all of the text, this is what we're looking at. And so the difference is this sign versus this sign. So the one on the left would be a monument sign. It would be permitted. The one on the right would be a pole sign. It would not be permitted. So it, in more jurisdictional, here's a Maricopa County, 50% of the width of the sign, and so forth. Another in Glendale, the same thing. So if you're comfortable with 50%, we'll stay with 50%. If you want to go higher, like I say, I think it makes it read a little bit less like a pole sign and more like a monument. But just wanted to have that quick conversation.
Yeah. Architectural. It's the 75% is more architectural, and I agree with you on the 50%. But I remember my father used to design signs here in the valley, and he hated doing anything in Scottsdale because it had to be something that you couldn't read from a distance, and that was his problem. But
Still that way.
yeah, which makes it very rough for someone looking for not only the person that has the business, but also someone looking for it. So I would think the monument sign 75% makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Would existing
typically-
signs that are pole signs that meet that criteria be exempt, grandfathered?
They'd be grandfathered.
Okay.
Mhm. Yes. Okay.
Okay, moving on.
All righty. So moving along, historically, we know what a menu sign is. We know what a preview board is. We all know that, but Reed kind of changed the way we have to look at things, and in this sort of content, or this content neutral world that we live in now. And so in order to get away from potentially stepping into a content issue, we restructured our signs by classifying them based off of their physical characteristics, not what the sign says. So to accommodate to accommodate the drive-through signs, we created the Class 1 and Class 2, and that would allow you to have the drive-through menu board and a preview board. And one of the difference between the two is one has a speaker, one does not. And again, it would not, based off our previous conversation, the pole sign would not be permitted. It would have to be a monument type sign. Now, we did get some feedback. We rewrote this at 24 square feet. It seems that probably is going to be a little small. I think minimum of 32, perhaps even larger. would be a better size. But then we also, again, we did put where it can't be within a certain distance of the residential area, and then we wanted to, and we'll be talking about electronic messaging in much greater detail in 2 weeks. But the idea of allowing electronic messaging on this type of signage, because it's a whole lot easier for them to type in some keys and to go out there and swap panels around. Another is to potentially allow or require that these two monument signs be screened from the street somehow, and maybe potentially increase the distance from a residential area. Both for light trespass, because these signs are going to be on 24 hours a day, but also from the sound, the speaker noise that's coming across from them. Do we want to require them to be a little bit deeper into the property? So that was the gist of the conversation we wanted to have regarding this type of signage. So,
yeah, I have one comment. The 6 foot, and I know that there's some current fast food restaurants that have signs that are above 6 foot. And I know they'd be grandfathered, but before we decided on 6 foot, did we go out and look and measure any of the signs that are currently there? Because it depends on, they have to be 2 foot off the ground, so you're limiting them to 4 foot. And if you look at the drive-through McDonald's, they're taller than that now. Mm-hmm. And you also have to have a space down above. So I would think before we come up with just an arbitrary 6 foot, that we do a little research and measure some of the signs and make sure it fits, because those are panels that are sent in from corporate, and they're not going to make them shorter for surprise. Okay, so we need to figure out what is the height, and I don't know what it is, but I think McDonald's have got the tallest ones. Mm-hmm. So maybe we measure that, and because what are you going to say? You got to cut them off, especially because they're all franchises, and we need to make sure that this is what is supplied from corporate, and if it's taller than 6 foot, so just look at the height.
Yep. Okay. I'll take a closer look at that, and I think maybe the ISA may have some recommendations on that too.
Yeah.
That I missed.
I just think that
Well, in a similar fashion, I have to concur with Commissioner Smith. I was looking at the Maricopa standards, the 7 foot height, and thought, given what we currently have in place, well, again, measure, but it's probably going to be closer to the Maricopa County height amount.
Okay.
Okay.
And if they increase their menu, it'll be 8 feet or 10 feet. I think we need to reasonably, somebody needs to read this sign when they go up to order. And I think that it would be good to see what we have that seems reasonable out there, like McDonald's or whatever, and maybe call around to see, what sizes, these signs are. And also the speaker to these, is that considered a sign? Or is that some other, we're associating it with the sign, but I'm just wondering if we call it a sign or we call it a sign with a speaker.
We're calling it a class 1 or class 2.
Yeah.
And what made me think of this, I'm familiar with an old sign code where there was language that said that no sign could be audible. Well, how do you place the order at a drive-through restaurant if you can't have a sign that's audible? Well, the way around that was they stuck a speaker on a can next to the sign. Mm-hmm. Did they solve anything? No, they didn't solve anything. So,
okay, just a question.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we'll do a little bit more research on that in sign height. And in terms of the sign area, the ISA recommended a minimum of 32 square feet, but could possibly go larger. Are you amenable to the idea of going larger? If okay.
So,
depending on your research. I understand. McDonald's ships them in the panels. They're not going to cut them down for surprise.
All right. Okay, next one. Class 3 monument signs. Again, this was really meant to accommodate a directional sign. These are intentionally short. The idea was that they would be near a driveway entrance, pointing to whatever. The idea, again, it's a small stout little sign. It clears the site visibility triangles and so forth. Not a lot to say about it, but you know, is there an opportunity to allow more of these signage within the interior of the site? I don't have a real problem with allowing them more of that type of sign interior to the site. Maybe I have to quantify when and where, but so I don't know if you guys have any additional thoughts on that.
You know, it seems like there's just a little ambiguity to the Class 3 monument signs to me. If it's intended to be a sign that in a large development takes you from an entrance to a building, and that monument 3 Class 3 sign is intended to get you directionally to go to a different building further or deeper in a development. Yeah, it seems a little ambiguous, but beneficial sign I can see too for a business that might be in the back of a business development where there's multiple turns just to get back to, you know, a dentistry or whatever it might be.
And Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, another, you know, maybe to that point about the ambiguity, there's this type of sign, and there are some jurisdictions that just really they just combine the two signs together and just call it one sign. Now this one is a bigger sign. This particular one is 12 square feet and 6 feet high, and it would not be appropriate by the site triangle going into a driveway. But this idea is to be able, is about wayfinding and getting people through the site, and that's what we were hoping for here. So again, whatever, if you guys had any specific thoughts, I mean. All right. Okay, moving on. All right, so the next one, we created 2 additional classes of sign, a 4 and a 5, and really it is a minor monument sign versus a major monument sign. And going into that, I'm going to click on this, and this is just another little study we did, kind of an exercise and how we got to where we are. And so if we look at the current sign code and what is currently allowed, it is a little bit, there's a lot going on. So maximum height of 10 feet measured from the edge of pavement, 48 square feet up to 10 acres, 60 square feet from 10 to 20 acres, 80 square feet if it's more than 20 acres, unless it's a single tenant building. In C1, then you get 12 square feet, or in C2 or C3, you get 36 square feet up to 2 acres, or 48 square feet up to 2. So very, we wanted to simplify all of that. And so as we were working through this, the original spaghetti draft this was not anything that was published. This was our working document internally. We ultimately wound up, when we got to this point here, we're looking at a much larger sign, 15 feet tall, and the bottom of the address being 3 feet off of the deck. And this is consistent with I believe it is our fire code also wants this, and we wouldn't mind actually raising that, but we don't want to create an immediate conflict between 2 codes. So we're comfortable with leaving this alone at 3 feet. Now, there is a provision in the United States Sign Council. They did some empirical research, and they're talking about how tall signs ought to be. And their recommendation is that the bottom of the sign, which would be represented by this red line, be 7 feet in the air. And that is to allow for traffic to be able, for the drivers to be able to see over the cars as they're maneuvering through the lanes. And but that can create a mighty big sign. And but they have an alternative recommendation to maybe just dialing that back to 5 feet, and that's where we went with. So this kind of shows that 7 foot. Like I say, that's a big sign. And so moving through it, then we put in the trees and so forth, how, the top of the sign, if it's at 15 feet, the trees, this goes back to our previous comment about what happens with the trees. You can't see the sign, that sort of thing. and then what happens when you have a bunch of trees and so forth. So we kind of we're trying to work through all of this as we came up with this sign standards, and even to the effect of the immature trees. At some point, those trees will grow up and they'll have nice canopies. But what happens in the 10 or 15 years in between that, you've got small, short trees.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that we wanted to look at is the site, visibility as you're approaching the turn. So if if the sign is located in this, hypothetically in this location, and this dashed line is the line of the viewer's eyeball as they're driving down the road, and then this is the site visibility requirements per the sign council. And so then we lay in, there's also a site distance requirement for our own design standards, engineering design standards, and a site visibility triangle for our own design standards, and then a bunch of trees. And then what does that do, to the site visibility? So we took out some of the trees, and now the yellow line represents that view angle as the driver is moving forward. And you can see that those trees, they do a pretty good job of blocking that sign. And but again, I think we can handle that through working through our PEDs and our landscape design guidelines. And if we can space the trees out a little bit better, we open that view corridor up, and I think it'll be much more helpful. Now, one of the things that we could think about too is capping the top of the sign at 12 feet, but allowing maybe an additional 3 feet for some sort of an architectural embellishment that would serve to help with placemaking and so forth. We might be able to look at that kind of language rather than having this top panel be, store sign copy. That's something we can look at. And then this would be the configuration as it's written in the code, or as it's written in the draft code. I don't want to get into that necessarily, but so then we get into, excuse me, we wrote it with the two classes of a sign. It was basically a minor sign and a major sign. The minor sign, it was intended to go along a high volume collector, a residential collector, a commercial collector, and was spaced at one per driveway for non-residential uses and so forth. Maximum height of 8 feet. And then we set the bottom of the sign at 4 feet, which is goes against the sign council's recommendation, but we're also looking at much slower speed limits on this classification of road. So we felt that dialing that back would be okay. Then moving into the larger sign, this is the big sign. These are the 15-foot tall signs. And here we set the bottom of the sign at 5 feet per the sign council's recommendation. We kept the address at 3 feet, 120 square feet of sign area. But again, we could clip the top of that off and have that be for architectural embellishments and so forth. The International Sign Council also suggests that, the International Sign Association also suggests that we get rid of the width requirement, keep the cap, keep the height capped, but get rid of the width. And that could also create an opportunity for more creative signage and so forth, rather than, again, trying to fit things into a box. Just today, I was out in the field and I wanted to kind of put things into perspective. And there's something I didn't delete, but this is just right up the road. And this is you can see how this is a 25-foot tall sign, and I'm standing next to it. I'm 6'3", and get a sense of how big that sign is. Now, if we're looking at a 15-foot sign, we're probably looking at something in this neighborhood right here, just to put that into perspective. And again, this is just right up by Uptown Alley. I don't know what's going on in that thing. All right. So different jurisdictions have different, I'm sorry, this was ours. I'm sorry. I need some water. This was a graphic that I put together to compare the two signs, the Class 4 and the Class 5, just to put them side by side. And then, and I don't know what happened. But then there was an alternative way of doing this, and that was to just go with one classification of sign, but limit the height based off of its relationship to residential residential property line, because that's really what we're kind of concerned about. And we can do that too. Now, we'd have to adjust the numbers on this a little bit, but there is some beauty to having that just have the one classification of sign, not the least of which is if you look at, if the city reclassifies the road as we did with Bullard Avenue, well, then it just changed what could go on that road as far as signage. So we might actually want to go back to this sort of methodology right here. Just go with one classification of sign and base the height off of its relationship to the residential. So quite a bit of jurisdictional comparisons. Now, one of the concerns that was raised at a previous meeting was maybe controlling against a proliferation of signs. And the way we set this up in the draft code was one per driveway. And maybe we want to look at not necessarily at one per driveway, but having an actual physical spacing, not closer than 300 feet or whatever that line might want to be. And we can explore that if you want to go that direction. I don't understand what's going on with my presentation. All right. So anyway, if you had some thoughts on that, is the 15 feet too tall? Are you amenable to the idea of going with a single classification of sign and just basing the height of that sign off its relationship to residential? What are your gut feelings on this?
I just have one quick question. Just the height of the sign, are we going to be able to get fire equipment and ladders and other things? It's going to be high enough for them to get through. I'm not sure what that height is, 12 feet, 15 feet.
Well, Mr. Chairman, in this scenario, and there's something going on with my PowerPoint. It's picking up, I don't know what's going on. So this type of sign would not have an overhead clearance issue. It would be a monument sign that would be outside of a drive aisle. So that shouldn't be an issue. And if the fire department had to effect a rescue from a,
I'm not talking about this particular sign.
Okay.
Maybe I'm skipped ahead.
Yeah,
I was looking at the Arch Road sign.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know what happened, but
Are these signs that you're showing us here based on the distance and height relationship from residential? The signs that you're currently showing on your...
No, Mr. Chairman, this particular sign, Commissioner, this is what was done based off of an already approved comprehensive sign program for that project. And I showed it because this is probably, other than Winco, this is probably one of the larger signs in the city, in terms of its massiveness.
So are you recommending basically 15 feet, or do you think we should have it based on a maximum of 15? I think a maximum of 15 is good. Now, as far as the distance between, you go up Grand Avenue, there's lots of cuts through there. And, if you put 300 feet, take by where Albertsons and that area there's lots of cut-ins as far as there's 4 entrances or 5 in that one area from where McDonald's or the Valero is to the stoplight there at Reams. So you're saying 300 feet, how many signs would be allowed there? I mean, it would not be as many as there currently is, which is, there's different buildings there. There's Village Inn, there's this, there's that, and all of them have some type of signing to tell people where their business is. So I'm not sure of the 300 feet. I understand what you're trying to say, but if we look at how currently our businesses are located, especially on Grand Avenue, there's lots of cuts that are a lot closer than 300 feet, but yet each of those businesses have a distinct sign and have a sign out on Grand Avenue. So I'm not sure if 300 feet's the right number, or I don't know how I think the 15 feet height is right, and have no problem with, you can go back and say, okay, the further they are away from a residential, up to a maximum of 15. I think that's good, but I'm not sure that if we just come up with a number and say 300 feet, then, if you develop a property where there's a number of cuts in, and I know that's been developed a long time ago, and we're not having as many, egresses into the properties. We're trying to limit them from the traffic standpoint. But we have a lot of places where we have lots of signs and they're way less than that. So I don't know if we've got any developments that, if we're spacing entrances more than 300 feet, then that might be a good rule. But if we're letting the entrances be closer than that, maybe that's not the right rule. I don't know. I just am looking at that one block and saying, we got a lot more signs there than if you said one every 300 feet, you'd be, saying if it was built today, some of the buildings wouldn't get a sign and they're freestanding buildings. So I'm not sure if that's correct or not. Just a comment.
On this one that you have here, the Boulevard Surprise Point, how tall is that one where you're standing next to?
If it was built per plan, it should be 25 feet.
Okay, but you're talking about making it to where the maximum that could be 15.
Yeah, and I wouldn't affect this sign because this.
Right,
would
it
be
wouldn't
covered,
affect
yes.
this sign, but my concern is that if we limit it to 25 or to 15 feet, considering what this is and what we have there, I think 25 feet is appropriate. So if we make it to where it's only going to be 15, and we have other areas where a 25-foot one would be appropriate, then we're limiting what they can have. So I think it depends on what it is that we are putting in these areas. Because again, I think that this one here is appropriate for what we have.
Mr. Chairman, one thing, and that's absolutely, I agree with you. One of the things that the draft code will allow, and we have to polish up the language a little bit, is we still have the provision for the comprehensive sign program. And so if you had this sort of a circumstance where, you know what, this is a big area and there's a lot of people and we need more signs for whatever reason, they can come through with a comprehensive sign program. You look at, you guys in the city council way it's written would have the opportunity to look at what they're proposing and you can say, yeah, that makes sense. And so there's an out for them.
Okay, great.
So
Thank you.
Yeah, I think just the volume of space on how big the sign is, like
a lot of big.
You may have a very, very large shopping area that could support, as this one does, many, many shops and so on, where a smaller area, maybe the 15 would be more appropriate. And so I think there should be a consideration of that, plus what Commissioner Smith has brought up. I think in an ideal world, and we said every entrance and exit 300 feet, it makes sense, but I'm not sure if we're doing that now. I know we didn't in the past. I think we have to be, some flexibility needs to be there too.
All right, we can work on that. When we set it up for driveway, the logic behind that is we have access management and there's requirements or spacing requirements for driveways, and so all right, we've already got a built-in sort of separation, but there's some inherent difficulties with that as well. So we'll put and in 4 weeks we'll put together a graphic that maybe gets to this a little bit better, shows what that spacing might look like. I do have one quick question, and that is in terms of the extra 3 feet on the top for architectural embellishments. Would you be amenable to 15 feet of sign before you get to that architectural embellishment, or 15 feet to the top, period? And so you have 12 feet of sign and then 3 feet of architectural embellishment. Do you have any opinion on that, one way or the other?
Well, then you're saying that the maximum height's 18 feet. And that may not be appropriate in some small if you're saying we're going to add 3 feet of architectural. So I don't know. I mean, all of a sudden 18 feet's up to, on this little picture, the only thing that's above 18 feet is the architectural embellishment there. So I don't know. How does it fit with the majority of our 20-acre little corners that we have, for commercial? Do you need a 18-foot sign? Do you need a 15-foot sign? Do you need a 25-foot sign? If we said 15's the maximum, then maybe they use 2 foot of architectural and 13 foot of signing, I don't know. I mean, it would depend on how many tenants they had as far as they wanted to identify what's in this particular development. I
It's
mean,
hard.
if you gave them a maximum, then it's up to them how they want to use it as far as the architectural embellishment. You could use, if you only had 3 or 4 tenants, maybe you want a big architectural and, 3 or 4 listings as far as tenants. So I don't know. I mean, that's something we need to think about. Do we want it 18 feet? Because that's basically what we'd be saying.
The structure itself, right?
And I find it hard to sit here and just talk about measurements and then just know what that looks like in the real world. I'd like to see more examples. I think that'd be helpful.
And I think from a developer standpoint, the ones that I've been familiar with back east, it is not their intent with a major monument sign like this to sign every tenant that is going to be in there.
Right.
So you may want to find out from some of our developers of our major, like this one, Surprise Point, what is the square foot requirement for you to put them on a sign? Because not everybody's going to be signed. There's just no way. So maybe that bit of information will guide you in knowing how large the sign square footage should be.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Bash, to that point, during our stakeholder process, we heard from one of the members in the sign industry, does a lot of signs throughout the valley, and he was of the opinion that our current sign code, this sign notwithstanding, but generally speaking, is really kind of restrictive relative to some of the other communities, and that creates an artificial market constraint, I guess you will, on that type of signage. And so by going with a larger sign, there's more opportunity for business owners to put on there. And that also, I think a lot of the folks that if they're not haven't fallen asleep yet, they're, a lot of the feedback that we've been getting has to do with the temporary signs. And my hope was that if we can create more permanent signage opportunities, then the temporary sign problem maybe, I won't say it goes away, but it helps.
I agree.
But we can certainly look at that. And another thing I want to point out too, and I didn't realize this, but last week I had the opportunity to speak in front of the chamber. And after the meeting was over, a gentleman came up to me and he said that he was involved in the adoption of the original code. And what he told me was that the current code as written right now was deliberately restrictive because they were trying to kind of be more like Scottsdale in that regard. So it was deliberately dialed back. So, and that was not a piece of information that I had. So again, it comes back to what is the vision, where do we want to be? And so, are the big signs in keeping with that vision, or do we, I think, so that's part of that whole discussion. So,
Mr. Kufis, I'm just curious. So, on this specific item, are we looking at potentially taking a 25-foot sign, reducing it to a smaller distance?
No, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, the language in the sign right now, there would be no provision in the code. There would be no provision for a 25-foot sign. If a sign was to come to you at 25 feet, it would be through a comprehensive sign program, and you would have the opportunity to look at that specifically.
Sure. As a former small business owner, I look at the potential and the benefit of advertising a business. And if we're going to take an existing 25-foot sign that's intended to draw residents and people into a business, to take the Surprise Point sign that's on the example for the boulevard and to make it much smaller, I just look at the disadvantage of that, and I think it's a disservice really potentially to businesses that would want to come to Surprise, that we make the signage smaller, we make it more difficult to get the customers to them. And so I look at, if we're going to have that where they have to do a special permit or something or a process to get a height up to 25 feet for a development like this, I'm just a little concerned that we, limit the potential business that comes to Surprise.
Do we have the number of acreage there is for the boulevard? How many acres that whole area is?
Chairman, Commissioner, I believe it's 40 acres. Is it give or?
So I'm just thinking that maybe I would look at it and go, okay, if you're going to be 40 acres, then you got to have a 25-foot sign. anything smaller than that, I think would be a disservice to those businesses. Like my commissioner here, fellow commissioner was saying, I think that if we went by acreage and said, okay, if you have X amount of acreage for a development area, then we'd be looking at a 15-foot sign. I do like the idea of having the 3 feet that you're talking about. I think that that is something that we do need to discuss. Is it going to be 18 feet and 3 feet of it is going to be decorative, or is it going to be 12 feet and 3 feet is I mean, I think that having that decorative part up there is important. And you're talking about the decorative part being the Boulevard Surprise Point, correct? And how many feet is that? What is that? Maybe 5 feet on the Boulevard Surprise Point?
5 foot 3 inches according to this.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think having it go by acreage might make it a little bit easier for people.
Chairman, Commissioner Norberg, one of the reasons, and this is pretty typical along most cities. There's one city that I know that doesn't have a CSP type program, which is the city of Glendale. But the majority of cities have a comprehensive sign program, and the reason to have that comprehensive sign program is that when you have larger centers like this, you're allowed, as Rob kind of mentioned, it allows you to deviate from the code in certain respects. The way our current CSP is written, it's actually fairly restrictive under a CSP type auspice. So theoretically, depending on how the CSP portion, which I believe that's one of the items that we'll be bringing to the commission for review in another presentation, correct, Rob?
It would probably be in, because we do have to make some changes to that language, so it would be in the 4th of the 4 presentations. We'll talk about that.
So the reason to have that other process is basically you're creating almost a separate sign code for the larger centers, for your power centers and those kinds of things. And it's pretty standard across at least across the valley of a way to do that. So you're not necessarily saying you can't have a 28-foot tall sign. What it really gives, it gives the commission and the council more oversight on if you're going to allow someone to go up to 28 foot, and allows you to basically proportionality look at, okay, what's the size of this center? What's appropriate for that center? That would deviate from our overall sign code. And that's one of the reasons to have that kind of that other piece of the sign code itself. So what we're really talking about is if you have a single business that has on a single parcel, and again, it changes, but I'm just using this for example, is if you have a single business on a single parcel that they would theoretically, and depending on how it's written, might have the ability to go through a CSP and to ask for larger signage. Or if they don't want to go through that process, then they would deviate back to the sign code the way it is now, and the 15 foot or whatever foot that is would be the maximum that they're allowed, depending on how that sign code is written.
So it seems that what would be the easiest thing then is just to rewrite and make it so that it's not as confusing and limiting, or maybe keep it limiting because they have that other option, but just maybe not make it so confusing as you have here.
Yes, we can certainly do that. Yeah.
I think that would be the better way to go if they already have another avenue to go down to get something bigger.
Right.
In my
And
opinion.
we've been able to approve in the past, sign exceptions. Moon Valley off of Grand was the best example, as they redid that. They come up with and it, obviously was not within the sign code, but exceptions can be made, and they come through the planning and zoning, and we can then consider whether that's right for the neighborhood and for the city. So.
And Chairman, members of the commission, just as a recent example too, the center there where the Dutch Brothers came in for a comprehensive sign package about a year ago, give or take, and that was an existing center that didn't have a package, so they were able to look at kind of the sign code. It didn't work for them. They were able to come in front of the commission and plead their case for a larger sign, which the commission ended up passing.
The big blue one that I didn't like.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a quick question. I'm sorry.
Sure, okay.
So this lawsuit with the Supreme Court doesn't limit us on any of that.
No, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Norberg, that Supreme Court, that Reed decision really, it has to do with content neutrality and so forth. We can't regulate what is being said on the sign, but we can still regulate time, place, and manner.
So more free speech regulation then.
That was the heart of that case, yeah.
Thanks.
So, yeah, within certain parameters that Ellen couldn't get into great detail.
On another day.
Okay. All right, so we did also include another provision for a roadway arch sign. 3 examples here. This one I just pulled off of the internet. This one is in Silver City, New Mexico. And this one is just right over on I-17 in Happy Valley. And so the 2 on the left are over a public right-of-way. The one on the right is over a private driveway. And I think, Mr. Chairman, I think this was the image that, the way we set this up, there'd be plenty of clearance and so forth. But again, we thought this would be an interesting way to bring some visual interest and so forth into the sign code. And so we just wanted to make sure that you had some comfort level with that. And if we need to, we set it up at a 15-foot overhead clearance. We'll double check with fire and make sure that that's adequate for them.
And all of these type of signs will come before the commission before they're approved?
I'm
just asking.
Sorry. Yeah, no.
Because they are.
Yeah, I think as the option here was to delete the language or allow through a comprehensive sign program. So we could certainly do it. We could bring it back as a CSP, and I think that would probably be appropriate, to be honest. Yeah. Okay.
With the fire marshal stuff, it depends on whether this is developed or not too, because if they're developing a piece of property and this sign is put in ahead of time, there may be some heavy equipment, cranes, other kinds of things that are higher than a fire ladder. I think we need to maybe check on that, if you would, with the fire department.
Okay. And then hopefully this is the last one. I think so. We also just included a way to be able to put subdivision monument signs on the corner of the individual subdivisions and so forth. Not a lot to talk about, I suppose. It just very simple, but it would allow them to do this without having to go through a comprehensive sign program. A developer could do this type of sign without having to get a special permission to do that. And so we just wanted to again make sure that you guys were comfortable with that decision. There are other jurisdictions that they call this a perimeter wall sign, and they'll allow them in commercial and industrial and so forth, where they have the perimeter wall of the site that wraps around. I could only think of a few examples where that would be maybe applicable here, so I didn't really put that provision in here. But I think there's ample opportunity for subdivision development to be able to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay, if there's no other question about this, our public here has been very patient, and thank you for staying, for you folks out there. If there's anyone that would like to speak about any of the issues that we've discussed this evening, this would be the time to do so.
Jeff Thomas.
Is Mr. Thomas here? No, Mr. Thomas. Okay.
James Carpenter.
Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. Do I have a time limit? I got to ask, because I was at a hearing the other night, and I was the only one speaking, and they gave me a 3-minute time limit, and I had just one more point, and I had to kind of argue to make another point. So I just don't want to get into that again. So, okay, I don't have a whole lot to say anyway. So, but I just wanted to commend staff on, I really, often when a code is updated, they don't bring in studies, science, or anything. And he's taking a look at studies and bringing in information that I look at and the industry looks at, but a lot of times cities and planners in particular, I'm a planner by trade, they don't look at a lot of this information. They'll look at other things like other cities and whatnot. So I just want to commend Bob on that. And one thing, if you want to not have any type of variances for a drive-through sign, 8 feet and 50 square feet will take care of 99.9%. It's a little big, but I've talked to the folks that are doing it on a pretty large scale, and they say that takes care of almost every one that they've ever seen. I know you can't design a code for everything, but that's one case where it would probably deal with everything. The other suggestion. Did I really suggest 32? That was way too small. If I did, maybe I did. But
I'm not sure where I picked that up. I'll be honest.
Somebody.
Let's see.
When you said 32, Mr. Rufus, you
Yeah,
qualified that.
If I did, it was not. It was a bad day if I said 32. But the other thing is, I think the roadway arch signs are a fantastic addition, and highly recommend if you want to help create a place. It is fantastic for doing that. I know San Diego's got some really, really pretty ones that come to mind, so I highly recommend that. I think the direction you're going with the ground signs is really good as far as the height overall. That's a really functional height, around 15 to 18, with the architectural stuff. That's not a huge deal, but that they function well and the square footage will work most of the time. So I think that's the most important thing, that they'll function well. And I wouldn't encourage you to look at Scottsdale a whole lot as you did in the past. I had to chuckle because there are some issues there too that we're dealing with right now. But let's see. Can I say a comment on the comp sign plan? Even though that's for later. I would suggest when you're drafting it, try to simplify the administration a little bit. It seems a little cumbersome to go to council. And I don't think there's an accommodation for amendment, because then it's almost equivalent to going through a conditional use permit or rezoning every time you've got to change it. So I would look at simplifying it, maybe up to a certain percentage. You could even do it administratively. And then if you go above that, it goes to maybe the commission, something like, there's a bunch of different ways you could do that. But happy to, you've got a lot of the examples, but I think I looked at that as a real cumbersome piece to that section of the code. And the wall signs, the 1-to-1 is too restrictive, especially when you have any setback. And you could kind of see on that one image, 1.5-to-1 is reasonable, and it's not anything that's because since the sign is always in ratio, it won't really appear too large. And I think the types of additional signage that he's talking that's the staff has presented is reasonable. Given the distance, it'll still be in scale. It won't look out of scale. So just the words for thought. Anyway, I think it's very close to where it should be to function well. And so I didn't really have anything else. So
thank you.
So I think it's a really good start.
Okay, thank you.
With the current draft. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. Madam Secretary, do you have anyone else that would like to speak?
Nate Brill.
Nate. Could you please state your name for the record?
Sure. My name is Nate Brill. I realize now after sitting for 2 hours that I'm at the wrong meeting, but I still think it was very relevant to me listening to all of this, and it's somewhat encouraging that I think there are people here that want the businesses to be able to do business in Surprise. I'm hopeful that when it comes to the temporary sign discussion, that you guys are just as amenable to us realtors who have a transient business. Because right now, the sign code is, I would go so far as to use the word draconian. Here's a violation that I have from another realtor friend of mine. She just got cited yesterday, and the description basically says that there shall be no sign placed anywhere. Literally zero. And open houses for us they're absolutely enormous, not only for helping us in our business, but for helping our sellers sell their house. But for me and my business, year over year, it's somewhere between 40 and 50% of my business comes from open houses. We are ambassadors to the city. I can't tell you the amount of new residents I have brought into Surprise because I speak very highly of my city that I love. But I'm getting to the point where I'm not so much enjoying my city anymore because the city is being so restrictive. And I feel like we got a bunch of hall monitors out there that are coming in, literally bringing us our signs and saying you can't do your job. You know, I hear all this discussion about how we can lead people into the business. How can we make sure that we have signs on all the right sides of the business so that people can come in? Well, with one sign in the yard, to me, that's tantamount to telling a business that they can have a business card in their window and hopefully somebody will see them. So that's what we're up against on a daily basis while we're out there doing open houses. I do anywhere between 3 and 4 open houses a week. And I am getting to the point where I feel like I'm relegated to go outside of my own city to do business. And that's not where I want to be. And I'm hopeful that we can come up with a comprehensive sign plan that is fair to businesses like ours. So I'm very familiar with the Reed decision, and I know that that's more about content. But what I'm starting, especially, I mean, I thought we were done. I thought we were done with this. I thought that the extreme violations that they were putting on us were done because I haven't gotten one in a long time, but last year was really bad. I was thinking it was done until yesterday. And I'm afraid that this is going to result in a lawsuit because we are being stopped from doing our business. And this is how I feed my family. And this is how I bring residents into our city. And I don't want a sign plan that makes it impossible for us to do that. So that's the big reason why I sat here for 2 hours, because I want this voice to be heard. There aren't enough of us that are vocal about it. There aren't enough of us that are willing to sit here for 2 hours and wait for our chance to speak, because this is a really, really big deal for us. We don't have the luxury of being stationary. We don't have the luxury of just having a storefront where people are driving past us every day. Sometimes there are 18 turns just to get into the neighborhood. So I've done my part. I feel like I've really dialed back how many signs I use. I put one on a corner to make sure that people can find me, but sometimes it takes a lot of signs to get people into the neighborhood. And so I want whatever plan it is that we come up with here, I want it to be fair to all businesses, including ours, where a lot of people don't really see our business as a business. They see it as something that people do on the side. But for those of us that do this professionally, it is a big deal. And I know for all my other fellow realtors that do serious business every year, this is a big part of their plan. And especially out here in Surprise, we've got a lot of open space and we got a whole lot of places where we've got to pull traffic in. And this is the only way we know how to do it. So I just wanted a chance to say my piece for that.
Thank you for your comments. I know that we have already had a slight discussion about signs for realtors, and I look forward to seeing you when we actually discuss it.
So that will, just to make sure that I don't have another replay of tonight of sitting through a lot of stuff I didn't need to, when is that one?
Mr. Chairman, that'd be August 3rd.
Pardon?
August 3rd.
August 3rd.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. Will we get a chance to speak again on that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Are there any other comments?
Liz Rechia.
If you'd be kind enough to state your name for the record.
Liz Recchia. I'm the Government Affairs Director for WEMAR, the West Maricopa Association of Realtors. So have you ever taken your phone and tried to find a business, and that darn mapping icon is right in the middle of the street? And at that point, you are absolutely reliant on adequate, visible, and legible signage. When we first read this proposed sign ordinance, it begins with the presumption that the signs are detrimental, distracting, and poor land use. The courts have found that signs should be treated as free speech and communication, and we agree. Signs are the most cost-effective and one of the least expensive methods for business to advertise their goods and services. Signs are more than identifiers. They are the business owner's face to the world. They become integral to his or her ability to relate values and principles and emotions. A sign will be recognized by its color, its logo, its shape, its imagery, its texture. And people will recognize that business and what it stands for and the emotions that it elicits before they ever see a building or meet the people inside. Here's an example, the Golden Arches. Did you see the sign? And my guess is you probably thought about more than a hamburger. Legibility and visibility is more than a sign size. It's the ability for the passersby to clearly see. A monument sign on Bell Road in one of the secret shopping centers may need to be larger, or there may need to be more of them because of the traffic and the speed of traffic. I was talking to our managing broker at West USA out here on Bell Road, and she was talking about last year they had the ability to put A-frame signs at their entrance, because if you realize where her sign is, her wall sign, it's very difficult to see, so she doesn't get much clients. And this year, as soon as in April that A-frame went away, she has seen a drastic reduction in the number of people, both real estate agents seeking employment, as well as people seeking to find a house or locate a business through real estate in this town at her brokerage. Now, National Association of Realtors, at the time I wrote my response to you, had estimated that real estate transactions, one real estate transaction in terms of a house, produced about $46,000 in ancillary business to other types of businesses, inspectors, appraisers, escrow, lots of different ancillary businesses. But since then, they've updated that number to about $64,000. Signs should be adequate to the task. A large building or complex with walls facing in more than one direction may require several building-mounted signs visible from across a vast parking lot, as well as a city street, and from different directions. Building-mounted signs, the item number 1, concerns us. Businesses with more than one business under the same roof may not have adequate signage. Examples would be a grocery store with both a bank as well as like a Starbucks, or a real estate brokerage with a title company or a lender. The limitation of window signage is of concern as well. Many businesses express specials, products, or services with window signs. Limiting a business's ability to express these goods and services may be detrimental to its economic vitality. We're concerned with the CSP signage language and criteria as well. And we're concerned with the phrases appropriate to the character of the community, measurable improvement, appropriate to the neighborhood. These appear to be arbitrary measures based on the message or the speaker. In Blockbuster versus Tempe, the court upheld a business's right to have a sign with their logo, color, shape, etc. maintained. The limitations on non-conforming signs concern us greatly, particularly the methodology using amortization and depreciation as a determinant of value. A sign's physical structure may not be the most of its value. In fact, it may be, and usually is, the intangible, recognizable goodwill value that particularly when a sign has been there a very long time. We are concerned a business forced to take down its sign will not be compensated for its true value. Abandonment of a sign is not well defined and therefore subject to interpretation. The 90-day limit may not be adequate under special circumstances such as estate sales, bankruptcy, an owner's ill health, or other more complicated special circumstance sales that, rather than a business being abandoned and its sign being abandoned, is actually going through a very complicated and lengthy process to transfer that property, and it's out of the owner's control. Without adequate, recognizable, visible, and legible signage, business, particularly small business, cannot survive. We suggested in our comments establishing sign sizes based on the signs of the visual arc, legibility, and visibility. And we were gratified and appreciate the city looking at the science and the studies and also placing that under consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Madam Secretary, do we have anyone else that would like to speak? Is there anyone out there that would like to speak?
Mayor? Oh, I'm sorry. Is there someone else?
Is anyone else out there that would like to speak? Yes or no? Okay. Oh, there is. I'm sorry. Somebody was in your way. I couldn't see you. If you'd like to please come up and state your name and for the record.
My name is Beverly Dragu. I am a broker realtor. I've been working in Surprise for 25 years. I've been here. I used to be neighbors with Dick McComb when the old Surprise officers were there, so I can give you a history on the lot. You've just taken away my biggest commodity. I had my signs. My address is on Brookside, around the corner, so nobody can find us. Can't even find us when we give them directions. And then in April, here came my 2 signs. You can't have them. You can't even put one in front of your doorway to show you that there's a real estate office there. That's all I have to say. We need help.
Thank you. And we discussed this. I think that obviously you don't want to be here for the discussion about realtor signs.
Pardon?
I think you'll be, will probably join us on, is it August 8th? 3rd.
Yeah, I've been to all the
That we'll
meetings.
have a meeting and we'll be discussing signage.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? If you could please then come up to the microphone, state your name, and then again, you have already.
Nate Brill again. Just more of a quick question because I think it was you, Commissioner Eric, shaking your head as I was explaining the violation with one sign. These guys are out there and they're coming and taking our signs, and I don't know what we can do in the meantime to still continue on with our business while we work this out. I feel it would be fair for some sort of a stay to be put on these rules because they are so unfair. And we still need to be able to do our job. And if we're in violation because we're being obnoxious with our signs, I get it, but I don't know anybody that is right now. But I still want to be able to do my job, and I don't want to have to leave Surprise to do that. So I don't know what we can do in the meantime. I don't know who we can contact if one of us gets another violation, because I'm just waiting for them to come in the door. Every day that I do an open house, everybody that comes in, I just feel like it's going to be one of them.
I think that if you would like to contact Director Fitzer, maybe he can put you in touch with someone that you might be able to speak with.
I mean, Chairman, members of the commission, I can answer that question actually right now. At this point, because of the temporary sign policy that was repealed, we do not have an ability to allow signage like that. The way the current code's written, we have to enforce the code as it's currently written, which does not allow A-frame signs, which would be the signs that you're talking about. At this time, what we're looking at, so that is separate than what the code that we're talking about right now. The code we're talking about right now would allow some sort of A-frame signs, but again, that would be more for further discussion on August 3rd. But at this point, we would have to enforce the code the way it's written.
Wow.
Could you just explain to everyone when and why did this change? And was this not a problem in the past, and why is it a problem now?
Again, Chairman, Vice Chair. So what was done in 2009, the city enacted the temporary sign policy. The temporary sign policy, which was adopted by resolution, was put into place to allow businesses A-frame signage. Along with that, we all, so for about 8 years, we had a temporary sign policy in place. About a year before we, which was then extended and then extended again. The city council extended it for the last time when we also enacted the Bell and Grand temporary sign policy, which allowed for some different types of signage in along the Bell and Grand area that was affected by the overpass and the closing of the Bell Grand intersection. Once the Bell Grand intersection was reopened, based on that, we took both sign policies back to council, and the sign policies were repealed at that time. So at that point, we then gave a 60 to 90 day implementation period. I believe it was 60-day implementation period where we notified all the businesses and those that had A-frame signs that were out in the public sphere. So when we came in contact with those, we gave them the pamphlet of what they could utilize, which at the time was the kiosk program that we currently have in with respect to the kiosks that you see for home builders and those kinds of things, which wouldn't help your business.
Nothing helps our business.
So anyway, with that repeal, we gave the 60-day time frame where we were giving out the letters and notices, and then once that 60-day time frame came and went, we then started enforcement actions at that time, which typically starts out with a letter at first, and then we'll move on to potential citations and so forth if there's repeated issues with those businesses or entities in that were not with regards to the current code. So that's kind of how that process works.
So we're in this kind of state of there's no part in this code that is actually designed to work with us, the transient businesses, and so we're not allowed to do business in the city that's the way we do.
Chairman, members of the commission, currently we do not allow A-frame signage the way that the current code is written.
Huh. It seems to me that the city should have the ability to see the gray area of this instead of forcing us to not be able to do our job effectively, nor be able to help our sellers. So we can't do an open house.
Mr. Brill, I think that that's one way you can interpret that. On August 3rd, we will be discussing the temporary signage, and I think you've heard from Mr. Fitzer that they're going to be allowing some A-frame signage, more than likely coming out of that. So I would wait with your comments until the August 3rd meeting and see what comes out. But he's exactly right. He's bound by what's in the code, and the code was repealed, so he has to enforce the code. But that isn't to say that something's not going to change as we are rewriting the sign code and specifically talking about those signs on August 3rd.
Okay.
Okay.
I think the sensitivity that we have, obviously we recognize the sign code needs to be amended and modified. And I think that there's, we'll talk about that and discuss that on August 3rd for you, and look for you then. Are there any other questions from our community? Is there anyone else out there that would like to speak? See none. Is there any other commissioners that have any thing they'd like to discuss?
I'd like to thank that gentleman right there because you put together all the things in a much more understandable way. And I really appreciate the time and energy that you and the other people that you work with together doing that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again. And we have one last item, and that's any discussion of any direction or pertaining to any future agenda items. Do we have any? Hearing none, seeing none, then I adjourn the meeting.